voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. Today we are number one in the world. We lead the world in coronavirus cases, and we've surpassed 100,000 people dead. And yet you still have people saying, what a successful president we have. In fact, Lou Dobbs said the most successful, the greatest president in the history of the country. And you go, 100,000 people have died from something that, had he simply done nothing early in his presidency, had he not had Obama on the brain, this could have been thwarted. Had he simply allowed the regulations to go into place that were moving in that direction, we would not be in the place that we are right now. And 100,000 people are dead. Now, I've had a bunch of people say, but it's just like the flu, Rick. People die in car crashes. And you go, in literally 4 months, we've had 100,000 people die. So if you extrapolate the 100,000 over a 12-month period, you're looking at 300,000 people who would lose their lives. In the annual flu season, yearly numbers have fluctuated between 12,000 and 61,000 for an entire year. So to say it's just like the flu, no, it's not even close. For those who say, well, back in the 2007, it was bad. Yeah, it was. There were 61,000 people who died then. And that was horrible. It was the whole year, though. The Vietnam War only saw 58,200 people die. And you go, that could have been avoided, too, in my view, as this could have been. But don't you know there's gun violence? Yeah, and in 2019, 39,457 people lost their lives to gun violence in this country. Wholly unacceptable. And again, something this administration, as many administrations in the past, have done zero about. But what about car crashes? Yep, 2019 saw over 38,000 people die in car crashes. I know I'm not advocating for doing away with cars, but I'm advocating for people to learn to drive. Maybe we make the test a little more difficult. Maybe do a little more training. Maybe test a little more often. Maybe not once you got the golden ticket, you get the license forever. Maybe every 10 years, go back and take a test. Just kind of thought. But we're not going to do any of that stuff because we're Americans, damn it. And I guess, it's one of those things that I go back to, Chamberlain, who said Americans always do the right thing after doing everything else first. And we're kind of in that mood. I mean, we're in a really weird, bizarre place. You've got a president who was taking a drug that is now, according to the French government, banned in France for use on coronavirus. No more hydroxychloroquine for people in France because they've realized it doesn't work and it's deadly. And it's, as a prophylactic, just idiotic. But here's where we are. We have a reality star TV president who isn't smart enough or interested enough to actually lead. It was all about his petty beliefs, his petty slights, all of the things that he thought Obama had done against him. And it goes back to that press club dinner. If you remember the White House Correspondents Association dinner, where Obama just kind of ripped into him a little bit, gave him a little nudge. That's all this is about, that one night. And I can't help get that out of my head, that because of that one night, well, there were some funny jokes. Trump was big on the birther thing, and Obama shot back at a little bit. All of this now, everything that we've lived through over the last 3 years goes back to that night. And Trump's obsession with anything in the Obama legacy has brought us to this point. As we talked about yesterday, NPR came out with, and we knew this all along, this whole fetish with deregulating, this whole slash and burn anything Obama did. They were actually moving forward on ways of setting standards to combat these kind of airborne pandemics, to actually have a plan in place. And yet you had the Trump administration just toss it all out. Had they done nothing and let those regulations go into place and let the agencies do their jobs, Trump wouldn't have actually had to do anything. He actively went and destroyed our ability to defend ourselves. And then at the most critical moment, at the most crucial moments, he chose to deflect, he chose to diminish, he chose to mock. Now you can say, oh, but he did. He closed off the borders, which is his natural tendency. He's an isolationist. But here's the thing that really gets me. Throughout this, millions of people in this country are really suffering. And I saw a number today from the folks over at Americans for Tax Fairness who pointed out that our 630 billionaires, of which we should all have a favorite. I have mine. Stephen Schatz Biscotti is my favorite. Made his money the old-fashioned way, shipping jobs overseas and taking a nice little commission for that. But according to the Americans for Tax Fairness, 630 billionaires, they saw their income jump in 2 months. They saw their wealth jump by $434 billion, or 15% from March 18th to May 19th. The heavy two, Bezos and Amazon, Zuckerberg and Facebook saw their fortunes jump by $60 billion just over that 2 month span. At a time when over 38 million people have lost their jobs. In April alone, 27 million people lost their health insurance. And they're talking about the potential of really a depression. A new study out by the Becker-Friedman Institute at the University of Chicago, they're pointing out that, they're finding, 3 out of 10, new hires coming out of this layoff. The shock that they're expecting is 42% of the people who have lost their job because of this will permanently have lost their job. So while 3 in 10 are going and finding other jobs, they're saying 4 in 10 are going to be permanently gone. There's no job for them to go back to. And the question then becomes, what happens to all those folks? These are the people who you got Lindsey Graham and Trump and a lot of the Republicans complaining of that. They're getting this. They're getting that extra $600 for unemployment. They're living high off the hog. Understand, the only reason that we're not in a full-fledged depression right now is because we have injected a little bit of money into people's pockets and give them the ability to stay home and still be able to feed their kids and pay their bills for the time being. And at the end of July, when the Republicans let it run out and hold the country hostage and really hold us on the edge of not just no longer a global depression, but just a major depression right here at home, because they want their pound of flesh. And what is that pound of flesh? Well, it's immunity for employers. And it's not going to be just on COVID. It's going to be on a whole plethora of things. It's going to be immunity for the wealthy who are going to rob us blind at every turn. It's going to be for those 630 billionaires to get a tax cut. You see it coming. You see it lining up, because this is what they do. We see now that Boeing is going to cut 10,000 jobs in Washington State and more than 12,000 throughout their entire company. This is an enormous hit. And why? Why? Because, the Boeing CEO said it very clearly. We don't want an equity stake. We don't want the government to have any stake in our business. So we're just going to let the employees take the brunt of it. Screw them, send them to the curb. We're not going to sign up for a way to keep them on the payroll and help the country. It's about us. It's about our shareholders. We don't care about you. And this is one of those moments. And I've had a couple of conversations, and I've read an awful lot of thought on what this moment means. There are some who are saying that maybe what we're going to see is an opportunity to really pivot and change what our economy looks like. And it's one of those things that here on the program I've been talking about for the last several weeks. What direction do we want to go in? I've been saying for a while, we do need, at least for the short term, a universal basic income. People need to get money in their pockets. We need to make sure consumers have cash to help businesses stay afloat. You want to be business friendly? And this is where, business friends, this is where you need to figure this out. Is a handout what you're looking for, or are you looking for customers? At the end of the day, by giving money to consumers, the people at the bottom, the working folks who are trying to make ends meet, that helps businesses. There should not have been a dime, not a dime, that went into that $500 billion trough that the Wall Street snouts are in. There should not have been a dime for corporate America in any of this. This should have been direct payments to every individual. And I'll tell you, this is another one of those moments where my call for postal banking is an absolute must. It's one of these things that we really need to be putting at the front and foremost of policy that we need. We need to save the Postal Service, but we also needed to make sure that we can get things to people quickly in these moments of panic. But will we? The answer is no. Not while we have the current leadership. Not while we have people who are running our government who don't believe in it. And this is the scary part in all of this, because they've trained a good number of us to believe that government is the problem. And yet I'll show you example after example where corporate America doesn't care about America. They care about profit. That's the part they love about America. They love the freedom to take as much as they want. They love the freedom to pocket as much, to get as much political clout as they can, and to rig the rules in their favor at the expense of the rest of us. And this is another one of those moments. So, I keep coming back to this crisis and where we are. And it comes back to the simple labor frame of which side of this divide are you on? Which side are you on? Are you on the side that's going to benefit wildly from this? Are you on the side that's going to be able to pocket enormous amounts of money like our 630 billionaire friends who have, pocketed $434 billion in wealth in a moment where, the rest of our 401ks are tanking? And heaven forbid those people who panicked, who went and after the initial fall went and grabbed all their money out because, hey, I got to save something. It's the end of the world. And now they've lost everything. It's crazy. And we just live in this really, really bizarre time. And it is the two Americas. I mean, I keep coming back to this. And John Edwards in 2004 was right. We live in two Americas. Those who have wealth and those of us that don't. And also increasingly, a white and black world. And look, it's a place that I don't usually talk about. It's not my lane, so to speak. But looking at what happened in Minneapolis, for those who don't know, on Memorial Day, a black man by the name of George Floyd was arrested and killed by police during the arrest process. 4 policemen arrested him. One guy had his knee on the guy's neck. The guy repeatedly saying, "Hey, I can't breathe. I can't breathe." I was begging for his life. There were people in the crowd going, "Please don't kill him." The man ended up dead. The 4 officers fired. I'm sure there's going to be charges at some point, but people went out to protest yesterday. And the scene that you saw was of police shooting tear gas and beanbags and chaos. And I would argue led by police strong arm tactics. And you go, well, we got to have that protest control. But yet we had all these knuckleheads and nitwits at state capitals with freaking guns. And extremely peaceful. Not a cop got out of hand. I didn't see any redneck with his face in the dirt and a knee in his back. Even though literally he was screaming in the police's face without a mask on. You've got images of zombie-looking white people in the window, and police didn't do anything there. So don't give me, well, they were acting up. There was plenty of acting up going on in those quote-unquote reopen protests. The difference is how we treat different types of people. And maybe the argument is, and I got this from someone today, well, maybe all those people in Minneapolis need to show up with AK-47s, and maybe they need to show up with long guns, and maybe they need to exert their power. And you go, this is exactly what the crazies want. They want this kind of civil war that's going to pit us against one another. But it's a scary moment. We are in a scary, scary moment. And again, it comes back to one guy. It all comes back to one person, and that's Donald Trump. All of this is at his foot. All of this is the responsibility of one lunatic, one narcissist, one egomaniac. Question is, come November, are we going to wake up? Are we going to throw these people out? Are we going to somehow reclaim our democracy? Are we going to reclaim our country for some bit of sanity? Or do we have to have what I fear is coming, which is more bloodshed in the streets? I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Interesting news coming out of the White House today. Evidently tomorrow is going to be an executive order signed on social media. When we come back, we're going to talk with our good friend Sarah Kendzior about the possibility of regulating Twitter and social media, which I just find really incredible. But we'll get some thoughts on that. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
There's nothing more American than workers standing up, and the union gives a voice to win. On The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1943. That was the day 50,000 striking rubber workers ended their 5-day walkout in Akron, Ohio. It was World War II, and the no-strike pledge was in full effect. Bosses were awash in defense contract profits. At the same time, they used the no-strike pledge to violate collective bargaining agreements, crank up assembly line production, and ignore grievances. As one sympathetic headline read, workers forced to strike in defense of their living standards, slashed by soaring prices, taxes, and anti-union profiteers. Workers at Goodyear, Firestone, and Goodrich had petitioned the War Labor Board for an 8-cent raise and shift differentials that they were entitled to per the Little Steel formula. For a year, they waited patiently and were outraged when they learned the board had only granted a 3-cent raise. Firestone and Goodrich workers threw down their tools immediately and poured out of the factories. Goodyear workers soon followed. In a protest telegram to the board, United Rubber Workers leaders pointed out that living costs had increased by 23% since January 1941. They also noted that essential to maintaining the no-strike agreement was a just settlement of grievances and a $25,000 cap on executive salaries, neither of which had been adhered to. The walkout was one of the first major challenges to the no-strike pledge. Women took the lead as picket captains and dispatchers. Their leadership was accepted without question. Flying pickets cruised the city to enforce picket lines. Black workers at Firestone, impressed by the union's fight for equal rights, figured prominently in the strike. Workers returned to the job with their spirits high, having forced the board to reconsider their demands. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So evidently, Donald Trump tomorrow is going to be signing another one of those wonderful executive orders that he is so well known for. And look, the last one was right up there with some of the worst. We're going to give blanket immunity to employers who don't protect their workers as they force open the meatpacking plants. So how much worse can it possibly be? That's, in my view, one of the worst things you could possibly do. Well, now the people who love freedom of speech, the people who hate regulation, evidently they're claiming that they're going to sign an executive order that is going to heavily regulate the social media companies like Twitter, all because Donald is, angry because someone actually said his BS was in fact BS. And are we surprised? Not so much. And here to share some thoughts on our twiddler and chief, I've asked our good friend Sarah Kendzior to come talk with us. Sarah is the co-host of Gaslit Nation, one of the top podcasts out there. And also she's got a new book out, Hiding in Plain Sight, a New York Times bestseller, also a New York Times bestseller, The View from Flyover Country. Sarah, thanks for taking time for us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So thoughts on the executive order coming tomorrow to heavily regulate social media?
Yeah, I mean, people should be alarmed by this. I think of all the things that Trump wants to attack, freedom of speech and free media is going to be more difficult to accomplish. But, for the last few weeks, I've been giving interviews about my book, and people have asked me, what do you expect if he wins, quote-unquote wins, if he's installed for another term? And I thought, an attack on free speech, free media, done by manipulation of social media companies, by censoring tweets or scaring people into self-censorship was what was coming down. And now I'm wondering if it may be coming sooner than we thought. I think some of this is just, an act to intimidate Twitter, to complain about their attempts at fact-checking, to, cause a scandal because, while he commits crimes, because that's just a tactic. But broadly speaking, I think people should be worried about this. They should be worried about the influence that this administration and people connected to it are going to try to wield over social media and over media in general.
And the point of the fact that 100,000 people are dead because of his screw-up. This is a good change of subject.
Yeah, absolutely. And, he always does this. He covers up crimes of scandal. He covers up malice with feigned incompetence. And I think here, of course, he doesn't want people looking at the massive death toll. It doesn't bother him. I think he is trying to normalize mass death. That's the way that he's always felt. You can find decades of interviews about him being blasé or even gleeful about the prospect of mass death. But I think this is one of those times where, Americans are grieving and they feel uneasy, I think, about the lack of outward grief. The fact that the flag isn't lowered, the fact that many of our officials are acting as if this isn't really happening or as if the toll couldn't have been prevented. I mean, obviously, people were going to get this virus. They're going to get sick, but the sheer volume of it and the way it spread and, the lack of treatment that some people received, a lot of that was preventable if people had acted earlier and if supplies had been delivered in time. And, that's on Trump. And I don't think he cares on a personal level, but I think he doesn't want that kind of stigma just following him around ceaselessly because it's something that he, couldn't completely control.
Yeah, but here's the thing, and we're now finding out, as anybody who's been paying attention to this administration knows, that this guy has undone everything that he possibly can that's had Obama's name on it. Any regulation, he wants to slash and burn it. And we now find out from the NPR story yesterday that, in fact, during the Obama term, because of the H1N1, they did try and move forward on some regulation to help hospitals come up with plans, help health nursing homes come up with plans to deal with these kind of airborne contaminants through OSHA. And one of the first things that this administration did was to destroy all of that. So had he literally just done nothing at all, we would have been better off.
Oh, yeah. And I don't think it's just about Obama. I don't think everything is just a back and forth personality clash or a rebuke of Obama's legacy. I think they had different values, whereas the Obama administration wanted to conduct the baseline protection of American human life, provide medical services during a pandemic, have things on hand like masks and ventilators, whereas, Trump and the GOP, they're a death cult. They are an apocalyptic death cult. They rhapsodize about the rapture. They rhapsodize about people being murdered, and they rhapsodize, at times about depopulation, about destruction. There are tapes of Trump saying that he wants complete disaster, he wants economic collapse, he wants riots in the streets, because they see this as like a cleansing force that can make America great again. And you see the same kind of rhetoric coming out of people like Steve Bannon, out of Bill Barr. You see it in a white supremacist version from Stephen Miller. They like this idea that they're sort of, godlike figures who construct history. And so when a pandemic comes along, I think they see it as a means for social control, as a means to wipe out parts of the population they find inconvenient, like elderly people or disabled people, and I'm sure they're delighted that it is disproportionately affecting Black and Native Americans. And so, yeah, they wouldn't bother to stop it. It goes along with their broader gutting of agencies that have the social safety net that prevent the vulnerable, from disaster. So I'm not that surprised by it, but I feel like people should be looking closer at, what exactly did they do to the CDC and to these other organizations over the last few years. I was alarmed in 2018, like at the time that a CDC worker went missing and then died under, somewhat mysterious circumstances. There was also a lot of stories about, budget cuts to research, all sorts of stuff. And it just makes me wonder, like, what exactly did they know? And I'm not saying, like, they created the virus and then released it or anything like that, but that they certainly seem to have an interest in these organizations, and the interest wasn't linked to serving the common good or protecting the public from disease, which is what they're supposed to be doing.
Right. But and here's the sad moment, because as I'm hearing you go through this, my mind immediately goes to the place of, no, they didn't create it, but they didn't do anything really to stop it. So this is kind of one of those convenient crisis that comes along that they then can take advantage of to further deregulate, to say, hey, you workers, you have to go to work, and companies get blanket immunity. Or, as I just pointed out, the folks at Americans for Tax Fairness have pointed out that our 630 billionaires have seen their wealth just in 2 months jump by $434 billion. You're talking massive redistribution of wealth.
Yeah, it's disgusting. And of course, they were going to take that opportunity to enrich themselves. You see Jeff Bezos on the way to possibly being the first trillionaire. They're unaffected. One thing that this pandemic has shown is as unemployment is through the roof, as we're at record unemployment, stocks are soaring, and so that disconnect between the stock market and what this oligarch plutocrat class experiences and what everyone else experiences is just vast. And it's worrying because it shows how little leverage the public has in trying to get just anything, just basic rights, resources, medical care, because most of our politicians are beholden to this plutocratic class to some degree, whether through donors or just through pressure through corporations. And you're going to have a population that's increasingly helpless, continuing or accelerating a trend that's been true well over 40 years, and a kind of ultra elite that just coasts above it all. And that's what's in the White House. That's what the Trump crime family is. That's what Jared and Ivanka exemplify, certainly what Wilbur Ross and Steve Mnuchin and others who were brought in from Wall Street exemplify, and they have no interest in remedying this. And I don't see very strong leadership from the Democrats in trying to use what leverage they have to get a more, just plan of action for American citizens who are now struggling to survive. And it's in part because these are multimillionaires and recipients of donor money as well. And it is very frustrating because this is just the darkest time that I can really remember in American history between, the public health crisis, the economic crisis, the rising fascism crisis. Like, it's a lot. And they're not acting as if it's urgent. And the climate change crisis, you can throw that one in too.
Yeah, I mean, it's crisis on all sides of things. And, and we're in a really, really scary time. And I get people all the time who ask the simple question, is there any hope in this, Sarah? And, I look at what's going on in Minneapolis right now. Another black man killed by police. Another protest, more chaos in the streets. And, and I'm sitting here and I'm watching this play out, and I'm going, I'm struggling with, on one hand, you have what's going on in Minneapolis, and there's chaos with police, shooting, tear gas and bean bags and all kinds of stuff. And then I look at those nitwits and knuckleheads in state capitals literally screaming in the face of police without masks on, carrying guns in a state capitol, and nothing, no chaos, nothing. And the message that sends to me is really a very scary one.
Oh, yeah, of course, it's a frightening one. And, a lot of it has to do with race with white supremacy, and other parts of it have to do with the fact that some of these groups were, astroturfed groups that were put out specifically to obey or enact Trump's little tweets about, liberate Michigan and so forth. But those are interconnected things because this is a white supremacist administration, and they want to normalize the presence of armed white militias who are able to or even assault whoever they want without facing blowback from the police, and grieving black protesters as people who can be tear gassed, who can be threatened, who can be imprisoned. And, I saw all of this firsthand in Ferguson 6 years ago. And, so little has, I'm not going to say nothing has changed. Nothing has improved. It's only gone steadily downhill. And I think there's been less media focus on the killing of black men by police, or black people by police, or by white vigilante George Zimmerman types, because so many other things have gone wrong. But I think people are at a breaking point because what ties it together is cruelty, is abuse of power, is elite criminal impunity, whether from the very top at the White House or from officers who feel like they can just kill a black man in broad daylight, with witnesses, some of whom were children, and feel fine about it. Feel like this is just a thing he can do, and he will never face consequences. He will not be indicted. He will not be tried, because that's been the case for almost everybody who came before him. And that's why it's so important that there is accountability, that there is a consistent pattern of consequences and punishment for officers who do this. That should be the standard. They should live in fear of, hurting an innocent and unarmed black man. They're the ones who should be afraid. And it's sad to me that we've made so little progress in that direction, but that's what happens when it's supported from the very top. When you have people like Trump, or Bill Barr, or before that, certainly Jeff Sessions, that celebrate this culture of white supremacist police brutality.
Yeah, but the thing that gets me is, it's being, again, used to keep us divided and pitted against one another while they're literally robbing us blind. I mean, we're in a global pandemic. We're in a moment of potential on the edge of a Great Depression, and still one of the things that they use overwhelmingly to keep us pitted against each other and equally hungry, they keep throwing out.
Yeah, I think in this case, I'd be curious to see actual surveys, about this case, about, George Floyd, I believe his name is, and the reaction to his murder by the police. Because one thing that's happened is, journalism was gutted before the pandemic. Since then, there's been I think about 35,000 journalists laid off. Almost half the journalists in America have lost their jobs, and it's been very heavy in local media. And so when I see polls saying that, we're divided about this or that, I don't always believe them, or not polls, but reportage saying that. I don't always believe it because it tends to be conglomerated, in these coastal cities, that they create a narrative and then they just sort of expect to get away with that because there's nobody able to work to counter it, or very few publications that are. I sort of saw that with the AstroTurf protest, where if you looked at actual surveys of Americans, the vast majority were supporting shelter in place, a crazy number, something like 90% thought that we needed to be cautious, thought that we needed to wear masks, thought that we weren't ready to completely open up yet. And in the media, it's presented as, 50-50 or both sides, or as if these little AstroTurf groups of 100 vigilantes were somehow representative of a giant movement. I think most people can realize that what that officer did was criminal and was brutal. I think that there's a hesitancy among white people to criticize the police and to see it as, inherently systemically flawed. But I don't know. This one is so cut and dry, and there was a similar reaction with other cases, but there's always this attempt, to try to make it as if we're, on some issues, more divided than we are. And that's not to say we don't have real deep divides. I just don't think that they break down 50-50. Like even in, states where I live, like Missouri, that, vote Republican. I don't see it breaking down on that kind of equal lines all the time.
Yeah, well, and I agree with you, but the first three responses I got on this were, well, he shouldn't have broken the law. Those were the first three responses I got.
I don't know. I mean, when it comes to something like, I get a lot of things on Twitter, and at this point, I don't know. I don't know who. Sometimes I can tell who's human, who's a bot, but I do know that there is always an attempt to put forth a narrative, and so that's why I wish that there was local media. That's why I wish people really were being asked about their viewpoints and opinions. People who can verify or being asked by other people who we know are real and who exist about things happening in their community or in other communities. Like, that was such a basic thing that we had for basically the entire course of American history, and it's just been wiped out in like about 15 years, and we've been left with Facebook and internet comments in its place. And I just think it's really easy to create different versions of reality there. And we should keep in mind that that's been an explicit goal, stated openly by Karl Rove, by Trump, by others. Like, we create reality and you just inhabit it. You're just, our little puppets. And that's the kind of mentality that they have and that they want others, to kind of deny is there.
Yeah, good point. Last question I want to get with you, Sarah, is, obviously we started off with Trump saying that he wants to regulate Twitter and social media because he's all upset about, a couple of his tweets being labeled as, well, less than honest or less than factual. Because, the truth of the matter is it's propaganda what he threw out there. But you've got this moment where the conversation should be had of, come November, do we trust what comes out of the ballot box? I mean, because I have a lot of my friends. In fact, we had an election integrity expert on last night talking about, we want hand-marked paper ballots. And if you're in a state like I'm at in Pennsylvania that has the machines that you vote into and not a paper ballot, maybe mail-in's the way to go. I'm curious how you see this playing out because, ultimately this is about what November is going to look like in my view.
Yeah, I've been very frustrated with the lack of action on this, and I've been pushing for hand-marked paper ballots for a long time because we do need objective proof. Because whatever happens, the Trump will either try and succeed in rigging this election, or if he loses to Biden, he's going to, refuse to leave. He's going to say that it was illegitimate. He's going to say that he won, and he's just going to remain there, and it'll probably go to court. So what they need, at the least, is documentation of voting, our receipts of votes. I think that voting by mail is a good way to go during a pandemic because that's also something that can be easily exploited. I mean, first of all, there's a genuine public health threat, and I don't know what it'll look like in November, but, I don't think that coronavirus is, going to go away by then. So it makes sense to switch to voting by mail now. And then we need a system of integrity and transparency to assess those ballots, and we need protection of the Postal Service, which, of course, the GOP is trying to annihilate. And, I've been saying this about paper ballots for a very long time, and I've been saying this about voting by mail from the moment that coronavirus emerged, and there have been some efforts to do this. And, of course, you see the Trump administration targeting the states that are doing that, targeting California and Michigan and Nevada. And so, people just need to fight very hard on this issue, and they need to realize that they don't have all the time in the world, to do that. They can't let things drag out in courts. They can't let Trump run out the clock because that's been his strategy for everything in his life. That's how he gets away with crimes. And, this is a crime that we can't let him get away with because democracy and, literally the fate of the world rides on it.
Yeah, but, we saw today in Texas, the Texas Supreme Court ruled that not having immunity to the coronavirus doesn't qualify you to get a mail-in ballot. I guess the only way you can get a mail-in ballot in Texas now is 65 or older, have a disability or illness. You're going to be out of the county on election day, or you're in jail. But I guess the fear of getting sick is not something, and spreading a communicable disease is not on their list.
Yeah, I mean, that's another frustration of this, is that spot at the state level. And, Missouri just had basically the same thing, where certain populations are being allowed paper ballots, but for the rest of us, I think we have to get a notary to prove our fear of coronavirus is real, or, something crazy like that. They're going to make it as difficult as humanly possible, but, that's why you need voter education. That's why we need plans, well in advance, and people who voters can turn to get advice on that day, in case, anything can happen. They can be turned away in a manner of typical disenfranchisement. There can be rumors circulated on social media about polling sites being diseased. I mean, they're going to do every trick in the book, and I hope that officials are anticipating, what those tricks are going to be,
right,
and how they're going to respond, and to keep the integrity of the election intact while also respecting public safety.
Yeah, good point. So do you expect the executive order tomorrow to have any of that, any stopping that kind of misinformation from going on in it?
No, I mean, that's the thing is, I go back and forth on what exactly Trump is going to do to social media, because it's such a great tool for him. It's how he spreads his propaganda. It's how he dominates the media cycle. He's not going to want to give it up. What I could see happening are changes to just the architecture of social media, shadow banning, accounts suddenly not being visible, things like that we wouldn't even necessarily know, or a culture of self-censorship, or various people being knocked off while the rest of the apparatus remains intact. Like, it could go a lot of different ways.
Right.
I hope that the companies themselves stand up to him, but they don't. Like, they all they cower to him, or they treat him initially at least like a cash cow. And it's grotesque. It's gone on for so long that people should be able to just see through it by now, and also see the threat within it. But they don't. I think most people do. I think most citizens do. But officials and people in media and pundits and so forth are still, a little slow on the ball there.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. But, Sarah, I appreciate the time and the thoughts. As always, great talking with you. I'll look forward to having you back again real soon.
All right, thank you.
Thanks so much, our good friend Sarah Kendzior, writer, scholar, co-host of Gaslit Nation. Make sure you check out her fantastic new book, Hiding in Plain Sight. You can get that on the Powell bookstore. I'm trying to lead people away from Amazon. Also, check out her book, A View from Flyover Country. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, I'm going to talk a little bit about reopening government. Are we going to take care of our frontline heroes, or is this going to be another example of, blanket immunity for employers and, hyper risk for we the people? Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people on the talk.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. Can you imagine if the earth beneath your hometown caught fire and kept on burning for more than half a century? That is what happened in Centralia, Pennsylvania. And on this day in labor history, the year was 1962. Centralia was a mining town with 2,700 residents built above a rich vein of anthracite coal. It's not entirely certain what started the fire. The town had used an abandoned mine as a landfill. Each spring, they would burn the trash collected during the year. It's thought that the trash burning was not fully extinguished and spread to the mine. Once they realized the extent of the problem, town and state officials tried to stop the fire, but they could not. In 1979, the owner of a gas station in town checked his underground tanks. He found the gasoline had heated up to 172 degrees Fahrenheit. By the early 1980s, sinkholes began to open up around the town. One 12-year-old boy almost perished in one of the sinkholes. 7th grader Tom Dombowski was crossing his neighbor's yard when the earth beneath him opened up. He fell 8 feet. Todd was rescued by his cousin before he plummeted further into the 150-foot hole. In 1984, the government began relocating town members to other locations. 8 residents fought the relocation, and 1 permission to stay on the burning landscape until they passed away. Today, Centralia burns underground and is but a pile of rubble and abandoned houses on the surface. The asphalt of the town's roads have deep gashes and white smoke rising from the cracks. It's estimated the former mining town may continue to burn for another 2 centuries.
Some refuse to leave a place their family.
Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Sweet home for walls of memories.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So I'm still kind of stuck on this. They're going to regulate Twitter and social media from the people who tell you that regulation's bad. Regulation are job killers. I just find it, well, ironic on a certain level, where, as I said from the beginning, had they just left the regulations that the Obama administration had put into place and were moving us towards, maybe this whole global pandemic thing, maybe this doesn't get this bad. Maybe if they did absolutely nothing, we'd be better off. Too late for that now. Now we actually have this scenario. And what you have from this administration is forcing things open, hell-bent on we have to open immediately. And, you know, at least in the meatpacking industry, blanket immunity for employers. And you've got Mitch McConnell and the Republicans saying, you know, any further stimulus is going to have to come with this red line of blanket immunity for employers. And one of the people I worry about our federal and state workers and what happens with them under their rule. And here to share some thoughts on how our government is reopening, how workers are coming back to agencies. I've got Phil Glover here. He is AFGE's District 3 National Vice President. Phil, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, thank you, Rick. It's nice to be back.
So, you know, one of the things I've been talking about for a while is this fetish that Republicans seem to have about immunity for employers and saying, you know, we're going to force people back to work and not giving individuals a choice whether they're going to go back to an unsafe workplace or not.
Well, we've been having a lot of trouble even getting federal agencies to agree that people have been exposed to COVID-19 at work. So we've filed numerous workers' comp claims in the Bureau of Prisons, the VA, some of other essential, on the job 24/7 workplaces that deal with either the public inmates or large groups, and even workers' comp. They want to fight us on that. The agencies want to fight us on workers' comp, and that's something I think the state will be dealing with soon enough, because these employers that don't want to take care of PPE, don't want to change their workplaces to more social distancing, those kind of things, you're going to see more people getting sick, and you're going to see people applying for workers' comp, and it's going to be a big issue. And we're hoping that the governor and others see that within Pennsylvania, and certainly in the federal side, that's a big issue for us.
Yeah, I've been saying from the very beginning, we should be filing these claims. Every time someone gets sick, you file a workers' comp claim, because we're in this world where a lot of workers don't have health insurance. So if you get sick at work and you don't have health insurance, not only do you end up sick and possibly dying, but also potentially bankrupting your family over something you had no control over.
Well, I mean, people think the federal government, for instance, you get free health care. You obviously don't. We pay for our portion of healthcare, just like most employers make you pay a portion. And even that, people don't realize how many low-wage workers there are in the federal government. We have people that work in the VAs, for instance, and they're at the ground level. These are the people that clean up, that are janitors and maintenance workers, those kind of folks. They don't make a lot of money, and healthcare is expensive. So even for them, it's a challenge. And if they get sick, it's more of a challenge.
Right.
So we are trying desperately to make sure those people can file workers' comp claims, get those claims approved, and those folks make sure they're taken care of.
Yeah, but one of the things I say about that is, we've had this argument here on the program over the years of people paying for their insurance or not paying for their insurance. My employer, I don't pay out of my pocket a dime for my health insurance. I pay every penny of it through deferred compensation.
Right.
So I think we need to really make aware that the worker pays for it one way or another, but just through either lower wages or out of their pocket. So this idea that either you get free care and I don't is just ludicrous to me.
Yeah, that's true. And you started out talking about the meat plants. We have the meat inspectors across the country. We've had 4 meat inspectors, by the way, pass away to COVID-19 across country. These folks, they depend on the plants to make sure that the plant's safe. The inspectors don't have control of the work site. They have to come in, inspect the processing, inspect the meat. So if those processors don't make sure that their employees are safe and their employees have proper PPE, distance, all those kind of things, then our meat inspectors are not going to be safe. And that's something that we've definitely pushed with the USDA. Senator Casey sent questions over to the head of the USDA asking questions about this. We've stayed on them. And I know that, for instance, Congressman Cartwright's involved now in checking in with the USDA on those kind of issues also.
See, I always thought, and I know I'm probably wrong in this, but I always thought that if you had an inspector go in and they found something serious enough, they could shut things down. Is that not how it is? That if they find that conditions are unsafe, they have the ability to stop that, or can't they?
Well, they may be able to stop the lines if they find the processing of the meat is going wrong. This is a new thing. COVID-19 certainly going in, and our inspectors don't have a say in how the plant has people distanced, how the meat moves, how how those other private sector employees would be wearing masks or face shields or whatever they would be wearing. We don't have anything really to say about that.
But shouldn't you?
Well, you would think under the new under this dynamic, maybe we should, but I do not believe that any regulations in this administration have been passed to give our inspectors that kind of power. That hasn't happened. No. And this guy would rather cut all the regulations, no different than what we're seeing in EPA, some of our other agencies that really take care of people. They have just eviscerated enforcement and regulations and those things that keep, water, air, safe. They're not paying attention to any of those things.
No, it's all about, getting back to some bit of normal, because to me, it's for Trump, it's all about the election, and workers be damned, their families be damned, their health be damned. So, you as the people who represent these workers who are going back into these workplaces, what are you guys pushing for? Because ultimately, as we've been talking about here on the program for the last several weeks, the places where workers have a voice have a much better shot of not getting sick and having outbreaks than places where workers don't have a say or have any voice whatsoever. So what is it that you guys are pushing, and how are you approaching this quote unquote reopening?
Well, we're on several fronts. We got notified as far back as April 20th of a memorandum within government that was telling agencies to start trying to plan for a reopen. Now, I will say this, we have been open. The way the government agencies and the agency heads are couching this, our workplaces are functioning either on telework or they're at work at a physical site. So we haven't really gone home, and we haven't really sat at home. That's not how this has gone. But what we've done is established a 10-point plan for our local unions and our councils and the union in general to push forward. We're certainly making this known to members of Congress, but we have different, we have 10 different ideas. Physical environmental controls is important. Transparency with our employees so they know what's happening at the work site as far as people getting infected or outbreaks. And we want union involvement in those things. We want to open only workplaces in a decline of cases area. We don't want this to be someplace that's skyrocketing. We've got PPE and other protections that need to be in place before those employees have a complete reopening. We need to have those things done. We've got, if an employee gets symptoms, We want them to be tested. We want them sent home on administrative leave. If an employee, for instance, would report a violation or report an unhealthful situation, we want no retaliation to that employee. We do want contact tracing to be done to make sure that, we can find these outbreaks and make sure people are quarantined, make sure until at least there's a vaccine to this, if that happens. And then we need regular assessments between the union and management of what is happening. And we've put that out to our members and our local unions and our councils that handle these different work sites.
Right.
So that is something that we have put together.
So nothing in that screams out of bounds. It all seems like rational, logical, common sense. It all seems like communication of saying, hey, we want to make sure we have a safe workplace. We want to work in coordination with each other so that we can keep each other safe and that we can go home at the end of the day and not make our family sick. Seems somewhat sane, no?
Well, it's sane, but, we have had, as you know, and you've had me on before, we spoke about the 3 executive orders that the president signed in 2018. We're still fighting those issues. They're still trying to eviscerate all of our contracts with major workforces. The VA, for instance, their contract covers 250,000 people, and they are trying to wipe it out, even down to our National Park Service, Bureau of Prisons. They're going after all the contracts. So they do not want union labor involvement. He eliminated that.
Right.
Obama had put in place an executive order 13522, which mandated labor management forums. As soon as Trump got into office, he got rid of those, and they don't want that. They want to have ultimate control. They want us to be at-will workers. That's what they want the federal government to become. He'd really like to fire the whole set of workers and bring in like the old patronage system back in the 1920s, where you fired everybody, you start over with your party, and you fill in the blanks.
Right.
That's the civil service was built to get rid of that problem, and it did work. And unfortunately, this administration has gone right back to that playbook.
Yeah,
So,
as you were speaking, that's immediately where my mind went. He wants to go back to the payoff jobs, to where you could get a job only if you could grease his palm, not if you knew anything. I prefer, boring old bureaucrats who aren't political whatsoever, but they actually know their job, where they actually show up every day, they do their work, this is their life's work, and they do a good job. I seriously don't want to go back to the bad old days of yesteryear.
well, the big problem too is that he has completely eliminated the idea of having confirmed people in place to run these agencies. They don't have to go in front of the Senate. And since the Senate broke their own rules and they can appoint somebody by 51 votes, you never have to have a real confirmation anymore. That's the same with judges. If you look at what's going on with the judges, we are going to deal with this for 2 decades. Probably the judges that he's put on the court that are going to eviscerate union rights. They're going to, cases that we have won for 40 years are now being flipped back to the, 40 years ago.
Yeah.
It's just, these are things that this administration has blatantly done, and trying to convince our frontline workers, they don't see that stuff until it hits them particularly hard. And the union reps who are telling them, hey, this is what's going on. Well, I don't know, so we have to keep this up, and your show is one of those that helps us do that.
No, I appreciate that. But, it's not just the last 40, it's the last 100. What he wants to do is take us back to the days of Lochner, and, where if you're desperate enough to work in deplorable conditions for poverty wages, that was your liberty there, Phil. Only the thing changed now is they're talking about freedom. It's your freedom to go work in this environment, and it's your freedom to die. And it's one of those things that, I ask the question, why is it the only freedom that we as working people ever seem to have is the freedom to die for somebody else's profit?
Yeah, that's my grandfather was a miner in Uniontown, Pennsylvania, and I think they were on strike at that time more than they were in the mines a lot of times. But I'll tell you, my grandmother, after my grandfather passed, she spoke, you couldn't speak bad of any mine leader, any of the mine worker leaders If you did, you were in big trouble.
Yeah.
So in her house. And I think we need to get back to that education level. I hope we can.
Right there with you, Phil. I appreciate the time. I wish you and your members the best. Keep up the fight, and please come back and keep us up to date on what's going on.
Hey, thanks, Rick. You're always good to us. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Phil Glover, he is AFGE District 3's National Vice President. You want to check out their website, afge.org. We'll get links out on how you can do that. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
Charles Dickens, writing about the inequality and social turmoil that led to the French Revolution, noted that it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. So it is today with the horrific COVID-19 crisis. Consider the bad experiences of one especially hard-hit group in our country, the Navajo Nation, which has become a hotspot of COVID deaths. Making it worse, Trump officials delayed disbursement of $8 billion in coronavirus relief funds set aside for tribal governments. So the disease raged through Indian country for 6 crucial weeks while the Trumpsters sat on the money. In another screw-up, accentuating the worst of times, an Indian health agency in Seattle urgently requested medical supplies, but good grief, what they got was a shipment of body bags, complete with tags that read, "attached to tow." Yet, in an example of the best of times, an especially poignant gesture came when the Navajo Nation sought donations to help deal with the spreading virus. The fund quickly surged past $3 million, mostly because of small dollar amounts pouring in from a surprising source, Irish people. Huh? A little history. In 1847, during the potato famine that killed 1 million Irish and forced another 1 million to emigrate, a modest donation of $170 arrived, lifting the entire nation's spirit because it was sent by the equally impoverished and suffering people of the Choctaw Nation, 4,000 miles away in Oklahoma. This act of deep humanitarian empathy created a special bond between Irish and Native American people that has endured ever since. This is Jim Hightower saying, the Choctaw have a word, Iakawa, that means serving those in need. That's what turns the worst of times into the best, and we need more of it.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to. For information, visit hightowerlowdown.org.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So, a lot of us have turned into stay-at-home teachers right now during this pandemic as education has gone online. And as look, over the last couple of years, we've had a lot of stuff thrown at us. The charters, the vouchers, do we save local public schools? There's a lot of misinformation being thrown around, a lot of bunk. And I think a lot of us are finally coming to the realization that what we took for granted as kids, the system that we hopefully took for granted for our kids, going to look an awful lot different. The question is, how do you get good information? How do you get to the bottom? How do you get the facts? In a world that is heavily dependent on alternative facts. And here to share some thoughts on how maybe we do that, I've asked Mercedes Schneider to come talk with us. She's a teacher, a blogger, author. Her new book out, A Practical Guide to Digital Research, Getting the Facts and Rejecting the Lies. Mercedes, thanks for taking time for us.
Hi, Rick. Thank you for having me.
So why write this book? Because this had to be in the works before now. What made you want to write this book?
Well, I actually say in the book what was the impetus to writing it. Last year's Network for Public Education conference, I did a presentation with some of my colleagues on how to conduct research, how to, if I'm a community member, a parent, or a student, and I want to understand what's going on in my community, how can I get information, publicly available information. And so in the process of composing our presentation, one of my co-presenters asked me about what I wanted to put in the slides. And I just thought, I would need to write a book to really put something together that was really detailed and useful. And of course, I couldn't do that.
So ultimately, you wrote a book.
Yeah. So the book was in my mind at that point, a year ahead of time. And since I do teach, I do my writing in the summer because that's when I can sit down for hours and get in the groove and write books. And so last summer, I sat down and I wrote a practical guide, and I just drew on my own experience, chiefly in researching educational issues.
No, that sounds fantastic. But, here's the thing. I mean, we live in the information age. And I think a book like yours is important because there's so much information out there. And this is what I tell my kids. When I was going to school, we didn't have the internet, obviously. There was no Google. You had to be able to recall things. You had to know stuff. Today, there's so much information that the thing that you really have to be able to do is evaluate your sources and use the right information because there is so much, which is why I think a book like yours, I think is in that vein, why I think it's so important.
Thank you. But I'll take it a step back from that, Rick, and I'll say people need to know how to find information. There's so much out there. In my book, a thread throughout the book is how to Google, how to actually formulate the search term that one can use to find information, combining terms, names of people, even using. This is one issue that I've found useful in recent years was for older documents to add the term PDF in the Google search, and that pulls up older, pre-internet documentation in a lot of cases that is now out on the internet because someone scanned it or otherwise put it out on the internet.
Right.
But there's such volume of information out there that wading through it or even knowing where to start, some people they don't know, they have no idea how to start.
And there's, like you said, there's so much that it seems like a daunting task. I remember as a kid, having to go through microfiche and, old card catalogs and stuff. Today, everything's at your fingertips, but you're right. How do you pose that question? Where do you put the question marks? Where do you put the quotation marks to emphasize stuff? And you go into that in the book, right?
I go into, I question marks and quotation marks, I don't really go into. But the use of search terms. Now, I think I understand what you're saying about putting quotation marks around a search term. Is that what you were meaning?
Yeah, that's what I meant.
By that,
obviously.
I don't do that, but it's actually selecting terms, and combining terms in ways that might yield what I want, and even combining names of people, unusual names, or, for example, if I want to find personal information, let's say I want to find out who's related to whom, like by marriage or bloodline, that a good place to look, if I'm doing my Google search, is to include obituary or marriage or divorce, because those documents will produce listings of who's related to whom, for example. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, if you're doing some, like some of your family tree searching, that's useful stuff. So I get that. But isn't most of that stuff, public records that haven't been, digitized yet?
Well, not necessarily, and some of it is digitized. Some of it is in newspaper articles. Some of it is on online sites, And the purpose in finding the personal information isn't just for the sake of finding personal information. It's, for example, I might be researching where I want to see if someone has contracts with a relative. And I come up with these names, and I think these two are siblings, for example. And I might Google the names and then put like obituary, and then come up with an obituary from some years back where maybe the grandfather passed, and listed are the names. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Survived by such and such and such and such grandchildren. And then I've got some evidence that they are related. And you're right, this is in the public, but the thing is that there's so much out there that people don't know where to start to look, or they don't know how to necessarily think. I might be able to find that thinking outside of a box. If I'm doing some kind of research on public officials to find out who's spending what on whom and who owns this company, who's running this nonprofit, and are they related, if my mind is on that, I may not necessarily think outside of the box and say, let me go ahead and do a search of marriages or obituaries to see who's related to whom and if they are related. Does that make sense?
Well, it makes perfect sense. You're basically you're Dick Tracy. You're a super sleuth trying to ferret out information. But like as I was saying at the beginning, there's so much, and finding out what is accurate information and what was useful, I think, is the key. No?
Well, yes. Now there's a lot in the public domain that people don't realize, for example, that they have access to. For example, that they can request of a state entity or a local entity certain public records, which even include email exchanges or contracts or campaign finance. People don't know this. They don't know that they can find these things easily. Now I say easily. It can be daunting to find a tax form, for example, and to try and figure out what on that tax form might be useful information, or on a campaign finance site. And so in my book, I walk people through examples from my own research, from my other books, from my blog postings, where I was, trying to find out who was spending money on whom, who started this LLC, this company, and then they turned it into a nonprofit. What can I find out? Well, in the public domain, a lot of this is available. Some of it might be, you might have to pay a fee, for example, if you want documentation on the start of a company. In some states they charge fees, and in others they don't. If you want a record of a case, a state or federal case, you might have to join a site like Justia and pay small fees. But sometimes one can use, like, for example, the free trial period access to sites,
right,
to do their research. And you just have to remember that to opt out of the site if you don't want to continue the site, like newspaper archives. I use that. Betsy DeVos, education secretary, made comments about being the daughter of a public school teacher, and so in the book I talk about my research. Okay, you say you're the daughter of a public school teacher. I want to find out, and so I use newspaper archives, and I was able to find out information. For example, in her mother's marriage announcement, it talked about how she was teaching school and she was going to stop that, and her husband, her new husband, they were going to move, and that sort of thing. That information was part of a newspaper announcement. I think it was in the 50s. But newspaper archives, I was able to go through the archives and find that, and I was able to do that using a trial period to access the newspaper.
Wow, I'm impressed. I mean, I would have never thought to start going super sleuthing around like that. But this sounds like a book that I think everybody has to have if we're going to get to the bottom of things. Maybe the ability to do this is something important. So what are you hoping people take from this?
Well, I hope people will take the book. It is a very practical book, and if they have, it's written for a variety of audiences. My first audience was, as I mentioned already, community members, teachers, students, those who want to know things are going on in my community. There's out-of-state money coming in, or all of a sudden there are changes happening, and I want to understand. Someone wants to start a new project, a new school, something. They want taxpayer money, and where did these people come from, and who do they represent? I wanted to equip them to answer those questions by using what is out readily available in many cases on the internet, and in a way that I walk them through. You don't have to be a researcher to understand this book. That was the whole point of the book. It's not written like a textbook, like an academic's book. I didn't want it written that way. I wanted it to be, as the title says, practical for people. So those people it's for. But it's also a useful book for people who do research already, and they just want to see, there might be something else that Schneider's doing that I don't know about, and I've had people say that, I picked up some tips from your book. Other individuals, my nephew is in high school, he's graduating, and he said that he needed a book on how to do research on the internet, and I said, well, I have one. At the time it wasn't published, so I couldn't give him the manuscript, but it is geared for high school and college students as well. So a wide variety of individuals can use it, and it isn't a long book. I didn't want to make it long, but it is packed with examples from my own work. When I break it down. I was trying to find out the who's who. I was picking through the emails. I made the public records request. I picked apart the tax forms and the campaign finance. And, I didn't want to scare people with tax forms, but I just walked through like, okay, here's the tax form. These are sections that might interest you on the form, and here's why.
No, it's incredible. So the only the only ferreting I need to do is, how do I get the book?
Well, it is available through Garn Press, Garn, Garn Press, out of New York. People can order it there. It is also available on Amazon, so that's another place that people can purchase it. And it's available in paperback or ebook.
So we should be able to get that out to folks. We should be able to find that on the internet. That shouldn't be hard. Or if we even Googled your name, right? We could probably find.
Well, yes. My name. If you Google Mercedes blog, you'll probably find my blog. So it's easy enough. It's easy enough to find. People could Google A Practical Guide to Digital Research. There it is. There's the title, and they can certainly find it that way.
So we've now just taken the first lesson of the book in finding the book. See that
there it is.
Success already. But Mercedes, I appreciate you taking time for us. I wish you the best with the book. I hope people will learn an awful lot, and we get to the bottom of things, and we learn the facts, and we reject the lies, and make society a little bit better. But I appreciate you taking time. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Rick.
Great stuff. Again, if you make sure you find the book, A Practical Guide to Digital Research, Getting the Facts and Rejecting the Lies, by Mercedes Schneider, blogger, teacher, and author, of course, of the book. Thanks so much. Appreciate it. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1943. That was the day 50,000 striking rubber workers ended their 5-day walkout in Akron, Ohio. It was World War II, and the no-strike pledge was in full effect. Bosses were awash in defense contract profits. At the same time, they used the no-strike pledge to violate collective bargaining agreements, crank up assembly line production, and ignore grievances. As one sympathetic headline read, workers forced to strike in defense of their living standards, slashed by soaring prices, taxes, and anti-union profiteers. Workers at Goodyear, Firestone, and Goodrich had petitioned the War Labor Board for an 8-cent raise and shift differentials that they were entitled to per the Little Steel formula. For a year, they waited patiently and were outraged when they learned the board had only granted a 3-cent raise. Firestone and Goodrich workers threw down their tools immediately and poured out of the factories. Goodyear workers soon followed. In a protest telegram to the board, United Rubber Workers leaders pointed out that living costs had increased by 23% since January 1941. They also noted that essential to maintaining the no-strike agreement was a just settlement of grievances and a $25,000 cap on executive salaries, neither of which had been adhered to. The walkout was one of the first major challenges to the no-strike pledge. Women took the lead as picket captains and dispatchers. Their leadership was accepted without question. Flying pickets cruised the city to enforce picket lines. Black workers at Firestone, impressed by the union's fight for equal rights, figured prominently in the strike. Workers returned to the job with their spirits high, having forced the board to reconsider their demands. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So I just got an email from a friend of the show who lives in Minnesota. Evidently, they're waiting on results from a daughter's COVID test. Because she evidently works in the service sector job in Minnesota. And the concern is maybe she's got lung and as asthma problems, and it's just again one of these moments where it's getting closer and closer to home. It's more people who are being affected by this, and for those who don't take this stuff seriously, it's just maddening. And look, Joe, if you're listening, we're with you, wishing you and your daughter the best in this moment. It's just terrifying. Especially if it's someone that does have a pre-existing condition, someone who is part of the vulnerable community. It's horrifying. And I look at this story that came out of our Pennsylvania General Assembly. A Republican lawmaker here in Pennsylvania, a guy named Andrew Lewis, evidently announced that he had tested positive for COVID-19 back on May 20th. Now, our legislature, they've been voting remotely, and they've been doing very little stuff in groups. But evidently, the Republicans were doing some stuff, and he has exposed, I guess, a couple others. They're doing some self-quarantining. Again, the information very spotty. But this, again, is one of these moments where you've got this divide between the Republicans and the Democrats, and between, I would argue, versus sanity and, well, not. I think about this guy, walking around, potentially infecting all of them. And I know, don't go to it's only Republicans, who cares about them? I do. Ultimately, I still have a bit of humanity left. I still have a bit of compassion, even for stupid people. But I'm sitting here and I'm going, this is how these things explode. This is how things get so much worse. And then look, you could say, well, if he's an idiot, he got it, and he spread it to the other idiots around him, and they weren't practicing social distancing, and they weren't protecting themselves, they deserve it. And I fully understand that. But it's all of those other people that you bump into throughout the day that potentially you're going to infect as well. For instance, I took my son today out into the real world for the first time in a very long time. We're planning a camping trip in a week, and going to take my son fishing for the very first time. I have never fished. I have no interest in going fishing. Seriously, you go, how is it possible you're 53 years old, you've never gone fishing? It's not something I would ever want to do. Honestly, I grew up in a housing project in the inner city. The closest body of water to me when I was a kid was horribly polluted, and the only fish I ever saw were floating sideways looking up at the sky with one eye. So, as a kid, I had no interest. And it even got worse because I don't eat fish, so it's not something that I would even want to do just to eat. But my son came to me and goes, yeah, you said if there's anything ever I want to do, tell you, and we'll do it. He said, I'd like to go fishing. Never really done it. I'd like to give it a try. And I said, okay, let's go fishing. So we went out, we bought a fishing rod, and you got a little, cute little box of stuff that I don't know what the hell you do with. I guess tie to the string and hope the fish bites it. I mean, that's my extent of fishing. But, we go to this store, and this is the point, other than my idiocy and not knowing how to fish. And it's probably going to be the Keystone Cops of fishing when we do this. And I'm hoping he's no worse for the wear on the other side. And I told him, please don't hook me, because, I've heard of that as well. But anyway, we're in the store, and there are other people around. And in this moment, you see who the sane and the rational are. There are people who are very courteous. They'll wait for you to go by, or they'll stay away from you. They'll keep their distance. And then you know who the giant a-holes are. And you could probably even guess their voter registration by their behavior in those moments. Because, you literally had people who were going to walk right up to you and right past you when they didn't have to. And this is that kind of moment that's troubling. Because, ultimately, we have to depend on each other. Ultimately, we have to be courteous and considerate of others. And when there are those, and I would argue some of these folks, maybe in the GOP, they're in the General Assembly, being part of them, who aren't going to be courteous, who aren't going to be considering of others' wants and needs, are going to put us in this really untenable position, which is worrying about a bunch of our loved ones possibly being sick. And when I read the email from Joe saying that, he was sweating this out tonight, my heart went out to him, because what he actually wrote me without actually writing it to me is, I'm worried that my daughter's going to die. I'm worried that if she gets this, it's the end for her. And to me, that becomes very serious. And it should be very serious for each one of us. And to have people who are not taking this at all seriously, that's troubling. Now, look, am I hyper paranoid about, no, I'm not. I keep my distance. I wear the mask when I'm in public. I do what I can to stay away. But to just be, some of the folks that we've seen, it's distressing, and it's troubling on a number of levels. And the question is, how much more will we take? Now, some positive news, and there's going to be a lot of this coming out over the next several months of potential, hey, we may have found the vaccine, we're beginning test trials on humans, and this is a good thing, and we're on the road. Understand most test trials end up in, probably not. Evidently, they're now working on what they're calling a technical breakthrough. And this is, according to the National Institute of Health, they're hoping to make testing at home available very soon. They're saying that they're coming up with a high quality, accurate test that people can take at home, and you don't have to go to the doctors, like an early pregnancy test, I guess, only for the virus. And that's probably a good thing. That people can in the privacy of their home come out and take their test, and if they get sick and if they have it, they can go in for the next level of testing, and then maybe we can hold this down. So maybe people who don't have the symptoms outwardly or extremely, maybe they stay the hell home. because I'm looking at this story about this Pennsylvania state rep, and I'm waiting for the full story to come out. But I'm assuming this is a guy who was fairly healthy, didn't have it really bad, so probably didn't even think he had it. At least I want to believe that. And, was around other people, not thinking that, hey, I wouldn't get me. All the while he's infecting people. So I guess that's a good thing. Maybe we'll see some home testing, and I'm sure corporate America will be more than happy to. They'll be more than happy to cash in on it, and maybe they'll have it in time for my fishing trip, which we're going to. Here's the weird thing, and just to kind of kill this even worse. I'm not, I have no qualms about catching a fish. I have no qualms about, any gross stuff. It's not that. I don't know what we're going to do if he actually catches something. Because, my youngest daughter's going, but you're going to have to take the hook out of his mouth, and you don't hurt him. So now I'm going to have to deal with this boundary of my son going, yeah, we caught something. And my daughter going, oh, you're going to rip his mouth off, not throw him back. It just seems like a kind of a ridiculous exercise if you're going to catch it and throw it back. Because really all you did was you gave the poor fish a hole in the mouth for no reason. But hey, I can check this off of good father and son time and an experience for him, one that I'm sure he will down the road most certainly pass on to future generations about how horrible an outdoorsman I actually am. So yay, good times. I'm going to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
If you're in an impacted area, please evacuate.
Michigan dams fail, causing massive flooding and toxic threat.
It's one of the most powerful storms ever recorded in the Bay of Bengal.
Super cyclone Amphan slams into India. Trump administration hits renewable energy projects with rent increases. Plus, global emissions plunged an unprecedented 17% during pandemic shutdowns.
All of those stories and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
Thank you so much for that, Desi. Now, I'm even more confused.
See? Even the Daily Show's Trevor Noah is confused by you. This is your Green News Report.
Where's Brad?
Uh-oh. Okay, Desi Doyen, I'm almost afraid to ask, but what do you have for us today?
Powerful cyclone Amphan, the strongest storm ever recorded in the Bay of Bengal, made landfall in eastern India near the Bangladeshi border on Wednesday night, bringing major flooding with reports of widespread damage. Bangladesh, one of the poorest nations in the world, had evacuated 2.4 million people to shelters. Officials say it will take days to assess the extent of the damage.
And of course, those evacuated in India and Bangladesh were also under stay-at-home orders, and they have to go to shelters now and try to socially distance inside the shelters?
Yes, it's a terrible situation.
And that's a similar situation to what we're seeing in Michigan right now.
Yes, about 10,000 residents were forced to evacuate from catastrophic record flooding amid the global pandemic after 2 aging dams failed in central Michigan on Tuesday night. The region has seen record rains of as much as 250% above normal in recent weeks. Both dams were privately owned and had been rated in fair to unsatisfactory condition. As we go to air, no deaths have been reported. Michigan's Democratic Governor Gretchen Whitmer declared a state of emergency and in a press conference on Wednesday remarked on the stunning impact of 2 simultaneous disasters.
It's hard to believe that we're in the midst of a 100-year crisis, a global pandemic, and that we're also dealing with a flooding event that looks to be the worst in 500 years.
But wait, there's more.
Uh-oh.
The floodwaters threaten to inundate Dow Chemical Company headquarters and some 50 miles of toxic Superfund cleanup sites where Dow dumped toxic, cancer-causing chemical waste for decades. The floodwaters could spread poisonous chemicals like dioxin. Studies have confirmed that heavy downpours have already increased nearly 40% since 1950 in the Midwest alone because of man-made climate change. And obviously now we see our aging infrastructure is not ready.
Yeah, there's another dozen or so dams across the state of Michigan that have also been found to be structurally unsound.
In Washington, the Trump administration has been pushing hard for tax giveaways and other financial assistance and bailouts for the oil and gas industry,
instead of fixing the infrastructure.
Going so far as to give oil companies drilling on public lands a break on royalties paid to the public for extracting their natural resources because of the coronavirus pandemic. But this week, the Trump Bureau of Land Management decided suddenly that this was the week to end a 2-year-long rent holiday for solar and wind projects that are operating on public lands. The Bureau of Land Management hit them with a massive retroactive rent bill.
Wow.
In the middle of a pandemic.
They're giving free money away to the oil and gas industry, but when it comes to the renewable industry, oh, you must pay the rent.
But I can't pay the rent.
You must pay the rent.
Finally, the wave of shutdowns caused by the coronavirus pandemic has fueled a massive drop in global greenhouse gas emissions. According to a new analysis published this week, daily global carbon dioxide emissions plunged an estimated 17% in April over the same period last year, much of the drop from reduced transportation from fossil fuel vehicles taken off the roads. Overall, the researchers estimate global carbon emissions will fall about 7% for the entire year. Of course, it won't last as countries resume economic and industrial activity. But that 7% drop is the amount that climate scientists say we must cut global emissions by every year for the next decade if we are to avert the worst impacts of climate change. According to climate scientist Dr. Michael Mann of Penn State University on a recent broadcast, the study demonstrates that individual behavioral changes are not enough. We need massive coordinated government action to tackle the climate crisis.
We can continue to maintain a healthy economy and solve this problem if we decarbonize our economy. It's not rocket science. If you move away from fossil fuel burning to renewable energy, then you can continue to maintain a healthy economy without generating the carbon pollution.
And another way to look at it, we reached 17% emissions reduction by accident, not by design. Imagine what we could do if we actually tried.
There's an idea. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So as I've been saying, I'm still stuck on the whole deregulator-in-chief saying that now we're going to regulate social media because they had the audacity to point out that, what he said was misleading. What he said was wrong. And finally, it's only been, over 3 years. I've been 5 years on Twitter. How long does it have to before finally they enforce their own terms of service? Now, do I think they should throw him off? No, I don't think Twitter should throw anybody off. I don't think anybody. But to highlight the fact that you're full of it, I'm okay with that. I kind of am. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on the big news of the day and the Twiddler-in-Chief's tirade. I've got our good friend Bob Ney. Bob, thanks for taking time for us.
Well, thank you, Rick.
So, thoughts on the potential regulation of the social media platforms?
Sure. A couple things. Well, first of all, and I'm with you on the regulation. The aspect of it's a free country. You want to be goofy. You want to be an idiot. You want to be whatever you want to be, and then people can argue back. Within certain measures, of course, without threatening people. You can do it. Now, I think censorship's been in the eye of the beholder. I don't think this is a conservative or a progressive thing. I think they've censored at will, certain sides, both sides, all right, here and there. But on this one, it's interesting because I think if you and I had done half the nature of the tweets, or maybe 1/10 of the nature of the tweets he did, under this current system, we would be off Twitter.
Absolutely.
Or in Twitter jail, as I'll call it. But what has stirred the president is, it's not just the conservatives quote or being, deleted here and there on Twitter. It's a couple of incidents. One, Twitter for the first time, and I think they should call him out. I don't think delete, but they should call him or Biden or, anyone, Bush, Obama, whoever. They should call them out if they think that there has to be a fact check, right? And because he was for the first time fact checked by Twitter, it angered him. But also the fact of the, controversy with Joe Scarborough. I think it fits into this too.
Right, and I was going to say, to me, that's the bigger.
Sure.
That's the bigger part in all of this. And
it made him angry, and so he came back. Now, here's the other thing: if he doesn't like censorship, all right, then don't ask to censor by pulling his platforms down. Doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make any sense.
No.
But again, as you said, it's the first time. This is his little tirade. And look, he believes he's above the law anyway. So to have Twitter say we're going to have some little moderate amount of repercussion, that's wholly out of bounds.
Right. And look, I do think because they do censor, Twitter does.
Sure.
Because they do that, they give a pass to certain prominent people, including the president. They give them a pass.
No, and look, for years now, I mean, Trump's been getting away with this, and this is what triggered it. Just quite remarkable to me. And now you brought up the Scarborough thing, which has finally, with the husband coming out and sending the letter to Jack, who the CEO of Twitter, and of course them doing nothing really about it. It does highlight the fact that really, this guy, our president, is really just a cruel, inhumane kind of a-hole.
This one is so unbecoming anyone to do this, and especially the President of the United States. And also, I like, because I was in Congress, I like to share with your listeners, Rick, some inside baseball things, and something that hasn't been mentioned. And I mentioned this morning. This hasn't been mentioned before in articles that I've seen, at least. Where did Trump get this, right? Well, I served with Joe Scarborough. I liked Joe. I thought he was, very level-headed about, talking at least about issues. And there was no secret he was running into some marital problems, at the time. And when this accident happened of the young lady with the heart situation, and she passed out and she hit her head, he was in D.C., she was there. Number one, he wasn't there. Number two, he was not having an affair with her. But the whisper rumor mill in the Congress at the time, of course,
sure.
Hey, maybe they were having an affair, maybe this, maybe that. That was so outrageous, it came and went and died away, okay?
Right. I'd heard about it years ago.
Years ago, because I served with him, I heard about it, heard the whole story, etc. And what has happened here, of the president mentioning this now, the president, first of all, is oblivious to history that you and I know about the Congress. You know that.
Right.
If you have him in a debate and you say, well, what actually happened with McCarran-Ferguson law, with the repeal change, he can't even tell you, what it is. But what's happened is somebody has gotten to him and said, hey, there was a hot rumor at one point in time that fizzled out and died instantly, but we could revive that. And that's what I think happened.
Sure.
I think somebody whispered in his ear. He didn't even know that rumor was out there, and he's tried to revive it. But it's outrageous. And to bring this up, of all the things he's done that are outrageous, including that Ted Cruz's dad might have plotted the assassination of the President Kennedy, this one's a trip.
Yeah.
I mean,
no, you're right. I mean, the
was
fact that
stunned.
Ted Cruz's father was right there with Oswald,
right.
and Limbaugh, is now trending on Twitter because of this, because Rush Limbaugh said, he doesn't actually believe any of this stuff. He's just throwing gasoline on the fire and watching it burn because he doesn't really care if Joe Scarborough killed her or not. It's just it's a good distraction, and this is one of those moments where I actually agree with Limbaugh because it is a good distraction. Because you know what we're not talking about? The 100,000 people who are dead because he screwed up the response to this pandemic.
Right. Now, even Ben Shapiro came out and went off on this, behavior with President Trump on saying this. I don't know how anybody can defend him on this. Why would you have to do this? You're right. Some type of outrageous distraction.
No, I mean, to me, that's what he's a master of. The fact that he was golfing over the weekend, when we're approaching 100,000 deaths, again shows how just out of it he is, and how how much he doesn't seem to really value or care about anybody in the whole process.
But when I read this, and having served with Joe Scarborough and knowing Joe Scarborough, I read this and I was stunned. I mean, it just stuns you. But for him to go to this level and to basically accusing somebody of murder or complicity in murder is quite outrageous. Somebody said to me, "Well, can't Scarborough sue?" No, if you're a public figure, somebody's got to practically do something to you that's beyond outrageous to sue. No, Scarborough can't sue.
Yeah, and to highlight that, I mean, if you remember when Tulsi Gabbard, went after Hillary Clinton and claiming that, because Clinton claimed that, she was, part of the Russian deal. Evidently today, Gabbard dropped the lawsuit, the defamation lawsuit against Hillary. Because it's going nowhere. Because what you said, if you're a public official, good luck.
Well, you can't. And that's like right now, the House is going to sue the Speaker over proxy voting. And this was something that went away for a while, thank goodness, and it's back again. Remember when I think Boehner was suing somebody, the Republicans were going to sue Obama. You don't sue. You don't sue when you don't like what your colleague's done in the Congress, because you can't sue Speaker Pelosi anyway. Yeah. You can't sue her.
But it makes for a good headline, and it gets your base all tingly in the panties, and they get all riled up and lathered up, and it's a good fundraising tool.
Right, exactly.
I mean, ultimately, that's what it's about. It's about getting more money out of people. But hey, with the proxy voting, I actually know the guy who cast the first proxy vote. Had him on the show here a number of times. Congressman Brendan Boyle from the Philly area. We've had him on the program since he was a state house rep, but he's now the Trivia Pursuit question guy. We now know who that is.
That's something. Well, your show was quoted today in the national media.
I saw that. How did we get into the Russian propaganda?
Why? They call it Sputnik. We're in other places, but yeah, it appeared there too. Don't get me wrong, but they must listen. Everybody listens to your show, but it was quoted when you and I talked about it, and then they quoted your show and me on it because of the fact I had said on your show that there's an 1892 Supreme Court case, let alone other precedents that clearly make it legal to do proxy voting because the House can set its own rules.
Yeah, but again, the right needs something to whine and complain and scream and carry on about.
But this one shocks me, and I'll tell you why. They may, if they were running the show, say, a couple of years, something happens, the House returns Republican, they make it into an emergency situation. I mean, the last speaker blocked Steny Hoyer and I from doing it, but they make it an emergency situation where they say, hey, we absolutely have to have proxy voting. And, of course, maybe they won't be embarrassed that they tried to sue the speaker, but they'll just they will do proxy voting.
See, because this is one of these weird moments, Bob, just from a common sense point of view, because I grew up in the era of MAD. I grew up in the era, at the end of it, granted, of the idea of mutually assured destruction, that if we and the Russians got into it, it would be the end times. Obviously, my parents' generation, they were much more deeply into the threat of the end times coming. But I always thought that, in the event of, nuclear winter and all of this, everyone would go to their bunkers and there would be a way government could still function, and this being part of it. So it's shocking to me that in this moment, in 2020, living through the mutual assured destruction era, living through 9/11, living through anthrax, living through now this, that there isn't a way that this is already in place, that we've now in the middle of a pandemic got to be winging it.
Oh. Again, when 9/11 happened, I chaired House Administration. Steny Hoyer, who's the number 2 ranking Democratic member in the country now, right after Pelosi. Steny was my ranking member. We did all kinds of security changes, and not one single time out of hundreds of changes we had to do, some unpopular, not one single time did Steny Hoyer play 1 minute of politics. Think about that. We could have attacked each other right and left for things we had to do for the security, right? Yeah. Anthrax came along, and Steny Hoyer and I, amongst our staff too, decided, and we went to the clerk of the House and said, hey, let's create a system that the speaker and the minority leader can say, we mutually agree, we're going to use it in very rare circumstances, but we'll have it in place. It'll be electronic, because we had talked to, our technical people, and we got shot down. The speaker's lawyer said, no, we can't do that. No, it's got to be the old-fashioned way. If they had listened to Steny and I at the time, we would have that system in place. And again, they're not going to use it all the time.
Right.
They're going to use, so that's why it was never developed, Rick. We developed other things, alternative floors to the House. We developed alternative computer systems, etc. But that was the one where they said, the speaker's lawyer said, no, we're not going to do that.
Yeah, because it just seems insane to me in a country as large as ours. At a time when, air travel, you might not want to be doing that if you don't have to. That you could have a secure system where, we buy, 535 of these skiffs that, are digital or whatever, and they get them in their home or their office or somewhere where they can log in, sign in, and virtually be in D.C. sitting in their little cubicle.
Well, we had conversations with the NSA and our technical people. The developing of the system, now I'm talking back in 2001, right? 19 years ago.
Right.
The development of the system, the electronic part of it, Rick, it was easy peasy. It was a breeze. You got the iris scan, the thumbprint, blah, blah, blah. It was no problem. It was, the one attorney to the speaker that said, well, it's the tradition and you need to be physically present. And we're like, why? We're not going to use this as a vacation tool. This is going to be, wonder if, give you an example, wonder if, Lord forbid, but the Capitol was bombed, right?
Yeah.
What do? Let's sit out till it's rebuilt in the next 5 years?
And that was my point. I mean, with all of the things, going through the era, because look, Washington, D.C., when I was a kid growing up, was one of the top 5 places that was going to be hit.
Absolutely.
D.C.'d get hit, and then Cleveland would get hit because at the time it was a heavy industrial area. Detroit would get hit because it was a heavy industrial area. All those places with the capacity to build stuff, they were going to get wiped out. But D.C. was at the top of the list because that's where the leadership was. So to me, it just seems so short-sighted, but I guess not surprising.
It's a good of the cause measure that 20 Republicans now have, made political that they're going to, quote, sue the speaker, which they can't do anyway.
That's crazy. Last question I've got for you. Obviously, Memorial Day, we see another black guy killed on the streets at the hands of police. Again, we see another protest that turns into chaos because you've got police shooting tear gas and beanbags and, cops showing up in riot gear and the whole 9 yards. Are you as surprised as I am or as tired as I am in looking at these protests and then, kind of looking at them from the other, juxtaposing them with, what we saw in state capitals with guys showing up literally with guns, screaming at cops and not having that same kind of chaos? I'm really in this really, really struggled position over what we're seeing going on right in front of us.
Oh, I am too. I mean, on one hand, obviously, what happened to George Floyd is inexcusable. It's outrageous, and there has to be the process, which one would hope is going to be fair and have indictments. On the other hand, your point too about people showing up in guns, and I mean it's a constant thing. I mean it's happened more frequently than need be, and I sit here and wonder where it all ends up at.
Yeah, I mean, because I often when you talk about race things, because look, I grew up as a kid in a predominantly black housing project. I was one of the few white kids in the neighborhood. As I like to joke, we used to play this neat game called Chase the White Kid and beat the crap out of him. It was probably a fun game had I not been the white kid. But I always equate things back to it's about green, it's about money, it's about economic power. But the more I see this stuff going on, the more I'm realizing that it's about much more than just the green and the economic power. It really is about black and white and how different our society treats black people and obnoxious white people.
Right. It's mind-boggling of that type of force that had to be used for what reason. I mean, it can happen to anybody of any race, but obviously, it's a real problem, especially with the minority community of how they're looked at, how they're treated, and how they're handled. And it just looking at it, I really, for some reason, maybe because I'm naive, I found it just hard to believe that it still happens this way.
Yeah.
Hard to believe.
I'm right there with you, Bob. I appreciate the time as always. Thank you so much. Good stuff.
Okay, thank you.
Our good friend Bob Ney. Again, this is like I said, it's part of that kind of craziness that that sadly we've almost come to expect. Quick break. Right back.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. Can you imagine if the earth beneath your hometown caught fire and kept on burning for more than half a century? That is what happened in Centralia, Pennsylvania. And on this day in labor history, the year was 1962. Centralia was a mining town with 2,700 residents built above a rich vein of anthracite coal. It's not entirely certain what started the fire. The town had used an abandoned mine as a landfill. Each spring, they would burn the trash collected during the year. It's thought that the trash burning was not fully extinguished and spread to the mine. Once they realized the extent of the problem, town and state officials tried to stop the fire, but they could not. In 1979, the owner of a gas station in town checked his underground tanks. He found the gasoline had heated up to 172 degrees Fahrenheit. By the early 1980s, sinkholes began to open up around the town. One 12-year-old boy almost perished in one of the sinkholes. 7th grader Tom Dombowski was crossing his neighbor's yard when the earth beneath him opened up. He fell 8 feet. Todd was rescued by his cousin before he plummeted further into the 150-foot hole. In 1984, the government began relocating town members to other locations. 8 residents fought the relocation and won permission to stay on the burning landscape until they passed away. Today, Centralia burns underground and is but a pile of rubble and abandoned houses on the surface. The asphalt of the town's roads have deep gashes and white smoke rising from the cracks. It's estimated the former mining town may continue to burn for another 2 centuries. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Sweet home for walls of memories.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
Gonna finish today off with a story that I love. I love these stories. It so makes me happy when some moron or knuckle dragger or nitwit does something stupid and then ends up getting fired for it. And I'm even more grateful that they're not members of a labor union that have to then go in and defend their idiocy. Because understand, had they been members of a union, the unions would have to defend this insanity or this hatred. But again, you have this nitwit in Kentucky who evidently thought it was part of a great idea to hang the governor in effigy, and be very open about it. Actually got his picture taken. Evidently, his employer didn't think that was such a good idea and kicked him to the curb. So they fired him for doing this in public because, hey, it's probably bad for business. The wife loses her ever-loving freaking mind because how could they dare to fire him? He's such a good employee. And it wasn't his idea. This is my favorite part. He goes, it wasn't really his idea. It was, she was just helping. He was just helping string it up from the tree outside the State House. So my first thought is going, well, if you were to actually hang somebody and it wasn't your idea, but you just strung him up, would that be different? It's just, oh my gosh. But I'll tell you, happy to see that he got fired. Good for him. Maybe it'll be a wake-up call. And her too. Anyway, if you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast, the Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And as always, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.